Hi, I'm Jeremy Scott and welcome to the Jeremy Scott Spiritual Podcast, the podcast that takes a no-frills approach to all things spiritual. Hi guys, how you doing? So out for a walk in the usual place, the graveyard. It's a bit windy today, so you may hear some wind noise. It's coming from the northeast. I'm going to try my best to keep out of it. And if you hear any pauses in the recording, it's because I've switched it or put it on pause because of the wind, until I got to a more sheltered spot. Anyway, here's a question for you. Are we deluding ourselves? And by that I mean when it comes to using or having or believing in a spiritual practice or belief system. Are we deluding ourselves? Is there anything other than what we see around us, what we experience on this planet, which we like to call Gaia, or the University of Life, or Earth School? Is there anything else beyond what we have? Or are we just using these belief systems, these spiritual practices and so on, as a crutch, as a comfort blanket, as a pacifier, dummy as we call it in UK, to help us to cope and deal with emotional challenges and traumas and things like that? Have we just made it all up? Just be able to do that, to bring us that comfort, that sense of comfort, or that sense of closure when we've lost a loved one, or when we personally are experiencing a life-threatening situation, disease or illness. Are we just deluding ourselves in that way, that these practices and so on that we turn to get that comfort actually exist? Whether that's within an organized religion, or whether that's paganism, or whether that's shamanism, or whether that's another spiritual practice, New Earth, New Age, whatever. Are we just deluding ourselves? Did we make it all up? Well, in essence we have, haven't we? Because if we go back and look over times past, go back to prehistoric times and things like that, you can imagine people sitting around, hominids. Maybe they're not classified, say, as humans in that sense, but they are in human form. They are hominids, they're first primates, or evolved from the first primates, whatever. We're sitting around and looking at nature, taking note, being aware, looking up at the sky, looking at things from the perspective of, well, where's all this come from? Where did we come from in their own way of thinking? You can imagine that, can't you? And then over time, they'd come up with names for different star systems. They come up with names for the celestial bodies. They come up with names for this, that and the other, gods, entities, creators, and so on. And that over time evolves and evolves. Nations are brought about. They have their own ways of discovering and naming things. They have their own gods and so on. Yet there are some that do persist even today, from ancient relics, ancient buildings such as in Egypt, in Peru, in Turkey, and other places around the world which are connected to each other. The architecture, the way of building and the language used, very similar. Or the stories told by the native peoples are very similar all around this globe, all around this Mother Earth, Gaia. As an example, if we take the Great Deluge, which many now believe happened around about 11,000 years ago, and that, between 11 and 12,000 years ago, and they say that's when such a huge amount of water, the seas rose to such a level, whether that was due to rainfall or some other situation, maybe meteorites or whatever, but the sea levels rose to such a level that not only was the lost continents, which we know as Atlantis and Lemuria or whatever, were destroyed, or especially with Atlantis anyway. I think Lemuria may have been destroyed later, or there's conjecture about that. But also, there's seemingly evidence in mountaintops, even in North America, where there's weather erosion, water erosion in the mountain ranges, right hundreds, thousands of feet above today's sea level, which correspond to weather erosion or water erosion in the Egyptian deserts where the pyramids are. The Great Pyramids is the same kind of water erosion, which can only come from a mass of water so powerful and over a sustained period of time. So it makes you wonder, something's happened, hasn't it? And a lot of these things are attributed to so-called gods or other beings, other entities who are more powerful than us. Or they say that these things were brought about, and that's why these great gods are no longer around, because they've been annihilated, overcome by these situations. Now, I never really used to believe in a worldwide flood, worldwide flood. I always thought it was more local because of the way the Bible talks about it and things like that. For me, Noah and his family, and then animals 2 by 2 setting off on a boat. There's no way they could repopulate the whole planet. And there's far, far, far too many animals that were around even at that time, which would have fitted on that boat, even 2 by 2, and plants and fauna and stuff like that. So I never really believed that it was a worldwide flood. I was more of the opinion for many, many years that it was more like a tsunami in a local area, in the Mediterranean or the Middle East or wherever it was they were supposed to be, Mesopotamia or that kind of region, perhaps even Egypt. But it would appear there was a worldwide deluge. Scientists are putting together that evidence constantly, finding new things. Archaeologists are exploring all the time and coming up with new things in that regard, making new discoveries as they excavate ancient sites that they now have access to, such as Göbekli Tepe, And then the other thing is, a lot of these fantastic ancient sites appeared to have been constructed purely for astrological reasons, using mathematics that was way beyond what we would consider the ancients to have at that time. So they must have been well tutored by someone, or some ones, And we have stories of the what do you call them, the Anunnaki and so on, who had other sages with them, whoever they were, their apprentices maybe, I don't know, but they were the wisdom teachers, and they'd travel around the world and visit different nations, different continents or whatever, and different peoples, and train them, teach them things, such as the Mayans and so on like that. That's the other thing, you see. I mean, we know about the wisdom of Babylon and the Chaldeans. We know that from, say, biblical evidence, if you like, or biblical recordings or accounts of when what was then Israel, or the Jewish country, was Judea and Benjamin, the two tribes, were taken to Babylon against their will, you could say. You know, they were removed from their land and taken to Babylon for 70 years, which the prophet Jeremiah had told them it was going to happen, but they didn't believe it. So, and there they learnt. I mean, David himself, Daniel was taught all these wonders, these mathematics, the skills. There were classes, magicians, and all kinds of things, and you know, and he became the high priest, if you like, in that sense. You know, where did they get that wisdom from? You know, and we have all these ancient texts, the cuneiform tablets, and other writings, biblical writings as well, the scrolls and things like that, which apparently, when translated, tells us about these things. But we don't know if that's real. We don't know if that translation is correct. Because until, I think, was it the 1930s? I think it was in the 1930s they discovered the Rosetta Stone, and that helped them to translate a lot of these ancient texts, especially the Chaldean kind of texts and so on, and Sumerian, helped them with that. But we don't know exactly if that was correct, because just like the scrolls of the ancient Hebraic and the Armenian scrolls and so on, they were copied and copied and copied thousands upon thousands of times over the thousands upon thousands of years. Mistakes would have been made, you know. An N may have replaced an H, and vice versa, giving the word maybe a totally different meaning, or a slight different nuance and things like that. So we don't know exactly that. The same with Hebraic texts and so on, where they didn't use consonants. Sorry, they didn't use, getting myself mixed up here. They used consonants, but they didn't use vowels. The vowel system was a series of dots. That's what they used. They used the vowel system as a series of dots to let them know, those who were reading whatever they were trained to recognise what these dots, series of dots meant, whether it was an A, E, I, O or U, and were able to insert them and get the meaning from them and translate them and stuff. But we don't have that code. That code is lost. It may have been an oral code. It may have been something that was taught orally. It wasn't written down anywhere. There was no keynotes with any of the texts. So we don't know exactly if the biblical translations that we use today are 100% correct. Whether the meanings, the nuances of the accounts were correct. So did we make it all up? Were all these stories and everything, you know, just ways for the ancient shaman, or the shaman, whatever you want to say, you know, the ancient priests, the storytellers and so on, just their way of fireside stories to entertain those who were sitting there on a winter night, you know, cold outside, and there they are huddling around a fire in a cave or some other dwelling, and the storyteller, the medicine person, the healer, the mystic tells them these stories of how the world began and things like that. And that's why you get variations around the world as well of how the earth began, whether it's warring gods or spiders or turtles, all kinds of situations like that, different stories. So when you take all that into account, that we've made it all up, in essence, are we deluding ourselves? Can we, hand on heart, categorically state that what we believe in, whether it's a belief system or whether it's a spiritual practice or a spiritual belief or whatever it happens to be, that what we believe in is true? 100%, pocket gen, no doubt about it, true. The answer has to be no, doesn't it, in that sense? Because we can't say categorically that it's true. Because we're only going by what we've been told, what's been passed down through the ages. So we don't know if there is an afterlife. We can't turn around and say, look, there you go, there's the proof, there's the evidence, there's an afterlife. We can't turn around and say, look, there, I can prove it, I can show you, this is the afterlife. You know? And I know some of you will say, well, what about near-death experiences, all those who come back? They may just be imagining it, is how many skeptics would say. That's what they believe they saw. It was an illusion. It was what they dreamt while they were unconscious. You say, all right. What about evidential mediums? How do they come up with all this knowledge about someone that they're reading for, that there's no way they could possibly have known about it? And some will say then, well, they must have got that psychically. But if you don't believe that there's something beyond what we have here on this planet, how can you say or believe that they must have got that psychically? Surely that would then show that there's something else beyond us. A universal consciousness that we can tap into. That's what telepathy is it not? It's a universal consciousness in that sense that we tap into so we can communicate with each other the same way that animals and others in nature do it. They communicate with each other. And what about the mycelium, which are connected to the roots of the trees, carrying messages, warning the trees of danger, and the trees reacting accordingly? You say, yeah, well, that's nature. That's a natural way of doing it. We've got that from nature. We've evolved from nature. We have the DNA of nature within our very bodies. Then you only have to look at some people, you can see that we've come from animals. We've got animal DNA. Some of us look like horses. You know, and others have other characteristics that look like turtles, you know, with the lips or whatever, you know, or a nose look like a parrot and things like this. All these kind of features, we're all connected in that way. We all used the same DNA because we came from the same primordial soup. Good argument. Very good argument. And for many, they'd be stumped. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? Because the ultimate question has to be, well, fine, okay. Perhaps we are only here as we are now, and then when we finish our time here, we just crumble back to dust, and whatever is that makes us us, that essence, returns to the magnetic field or the energetic field and mixes in and has no memory, of who we were, what we did, and all that. All that is forgotten, is wiped clean, and then at some other part of time, perhaps we are born into a new entity that have no memory whatsoever, and maybe that's why we don't remember who we were once we are living in this existence. And you still have to say, well, where's it all come from in the first place? Where have we come from? Where has the whole universe and everything in it and around it, us, where have we come from? How did that start? How did those ingredients, just about right, come about in that primordial soup? To start off the bacteria and the cells or whatever, and then they eventually clubbed together and became greater clumps, and then eventually formed organisms and move on from there to become fish and other sea creatures, and over time going onto land, becoming grass and trees and animals and so on. That's fine. It's a good argument. However, I personally feel there's a lot more to it than that. I'm sure you do too. To be honest, I used to think along those lines. I used to think that, once we finished our time here, that was it. No God, nothing. We as the energy that make up us just crumbled and joined with the energy that is the earth. We just went back to what we came from. There's a good argument for that, in that sense. But it doesn't answer the question, does it? It throws up more questions than it does answers. So where do we come from, and why we here and all that? No one, I would say, can give a categorically 100% foolproof answer to that. However, if what we believe in is correct, now if we believe that we are part of a greater entity, call it God, Source, the I Am, whatever you want to call it, then we've certainly come from somewhere, haven't we? Are we, as I used to think, part of a greater body? Are we groups of cells within a greater body? Do we have groups of cells within us who are also got life forms in them, and they're saying, where have we come from? Does it go on to infinity in that way? So that's what I used to think at one time. Worlds within worlds. I wrote a lyric about it one time, or more like a poem, but it was called Worlds Within Worlds, and it expanded on that theory that we in this solar system, if you look at the way the solar system is and the way things revolve and orbit the sun and things like that, it looks like an atom. It looks like an atom with all the other neutrinos and was it rubinos, what do you call them, orbiting around it. So I imagine, well, if that's what this solar system is like, perhaps we are a cell that's also joined up to so many other cells which form the galaxies, and the galaxies form the universe, and the universe forms the body of this great entity that we call God. I Am. source. And you could say, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. There's something to that. You know, it's an idea. No proof. Can't prove it. Yeah. That's what it all comes down to at the end of the day, doesn't it? I mean, the whole of religion, organized religion, whether that's Christian or Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, it's all based on faith. It's all based on faith that you believe that it's true. And I've often said that whatever you believe in is true for you. When you put your thinking head on, so to speak, you just know there's got to be something more to what we have here. And you might say, of course there is. Look at the evidence that these evidential mediums bring to the table. There's got to be something more. And yes, as I said before, you know, you can be skeptical about that and say, yeah, it's all psychic and stuff like that. Is it? But that would mean that we have to be connected to a global consciousness at the very least, would it not? That there's something beyond us which is helping us to retrieve that information. And we like to say, yeah, that'll be those on the astral plane, where those who have passed, who have lived here, yeah, and had their life experiences here, that's where they go, that's where they operate, that's where our guides are, and others who are helping us, our internal teams and so on, helping us on a day-to-day basis. And above them we'll have the angels and so on, and it goes up like a hierarchical system in that way. So there must be something there, right? There's got to be something there. If those kinds of things happen, and I know from my own personal experience, the validations that I get are phenomenal. Yeah, as in success rate. As an example, recently I did sort of automatic writing, you know, where I freely channeled, you know, just channel the writing. I wasn't asking a question other than, you know, what do I need to know, whatever. And as soon as I'd finished, any time I do anything like that, when I finish it, I always ask for a validation. Yeah, and I was offered orange. And I said, well, okay, orange as in the fruit, colour, see the word. No, I got actual orange, an orange or oranges in an unusual place over the next few days. So I wrote it down, okay. And this was just before Easter gone. And obviously the next couple of days I didn't see anything other than the oranges in the supermarket, and you know, they didn't count. So there's a little thing for you as well. If you get a validation, or if you get something that's going to validate the message you receive, don't keep looking for it, because you'll see it everywhere, but it won't be a true validation. It's when that validation, if you like, whatever it happens to be, snags you, whether it's a white feather or a black dog or a stripy cat or whatever, when it snags you, snags your attention, unusually when you're not thinking about it, that's when it counts. So for me, it was maybe 3 days later, just before Good Friday, I was scrolling through TikTok, as I'm wont to do, and just scrolling through, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, an advert comes up for oranges. It's about, I don't know what, I can't remember exactly what it was about using some orange juice for juice or whatever. But there was oranges. And that was my validation, that the message that I had received was correct. And that happens a lot for me. I would say my success rate has got to be in the mid to high 90s, percent-wise. There's only been a handful of times over the last few years where, you know, the validation given was probably more my imagination, same as, you know, what it was I was validating was probably more my imagination than actual sort of message or anything like that. So I didn't get any validation, didn't work. So when you get that kind of evidence, and mediums get that, you know, from people or for people, for those who they're reading for, messages from their loved ones to pass on, there's no way that the mediums could have known about, I don't know, the next door neighbour's cat's gone missing and it was wearing a blue collar, that kind of thing. And the lady across, or the gentleman across who's sitting there, may not even know about it. But when they get home, maybe later on, and they're talking to the neighbour, and the neighbour may turn around, oh, by the way, my cat's gone missing. Yeah? So if you see a cat going around with a blue collar, you know, it's, you know, that kind of thing happens. That's the kind of validation where we are tapping into the global consciousness. So if there is a global consciousness, in that sense, then there has to be also a greater consciousness, a universal consciousness, a universal mind with universal thought that we can tap into as well, because there are messages that we receive not only from guides and those in spirit who are, say, on, as I said before, on like the astral plane kind of thing, or astral realm, or whatever you want to call it. There's many different names for it. Next level up from here. Let's put it simply like that. But what about further up, the angels, the archangels? You know? I mean, the Bible has a lot in that, you know, talks about that where God spoke to Samuel or God spoke to Moses. Was it God himself or herself or itself? Or was it perhaps an archangel or an angel tasked with that message, to pass that message on or whatever? You know, the chances were it was. Or it was their higher selves. And incidentally, your higher self is you. You are a projection of your higher self whilst in this reality. I might go into that a little bit deeper at another time. So I'm looking at the amount of time I've spoken on here. Is one of the longest episodes I've done for a while. Going back to the question, are we deluding ourselves when it comes to our spiritual beliefs, our practices, our faith systems and so on? Are we deluding ourselves? And I'd say no, we're not, because there is something out there that is far, far greater than we could ever imagine. And yes, we make up stories, and we have done in the past, about gods and creatures and mythological things. But in every myth and every legend there is a grain of truth. I've always said that. Well, at least since I learned it anyway. So from many, many years ago. But I do say that in every myth and legend there is a grain of truth. There's something. It may have been enhanced over time as it was passed down orally, enhanced maybe a bit more. It was just copied and copied and copied over the centuries, over the millennia. But the essence is still there. The essence is still true. So there is something more powerful than us out there. And we are tapping into that on a global level, but also, or astral level if you like, but also beyond, because we get messages, some of us get messages from angels at archangels at times. And it's not just special people get that, by the way. You know, we all get those messages when it's something. This is what I believe, okay, this is my opinion. When we get something that's really, really significant, you know, a message, a download, whatever you want to call it, an insight, that's really, really significant, my opinion is that's from an angel or archangel. So that's beyond our higher selves, that's beyond our guides, that's beyond those on the other side, loved ones and so on, who wish to help us out as well. So when it's a really significant major event type message where we can make a major change in our lives, or where we're getting told, no, stop, don't move kind of message, you know, like when you're walking through a minefield. Well, you probably would know, but I know this from experience from my army days. When you're going through a minefield and you find a mine and you say stop, and everybody freezes, you know, that kind of message, that I believe would be from an angel, archangel, and whatever, maybe higher up, I don't know. So we're not delusional, guys. As a former healthy skeptic, well, let's just say as a continuing healthy skeptic, I'm skeptical at times, but when I examine things further, then, you know, that can change. And that's the beauty about being a skeptic rather than a cynic. Skeptics can change. They're willing to look at things open-mindedly, whereas cynics tend to come from a closed door kind of situation, and they're not prepared to believe anything other than what they believe is true for them. So we're not deluding ourselves, guys, just to get back to that. So whatever belief you have, whatever system you use to communicate, whether it's to communicate with others here, or whether it's to communicate with those across the veil, as they call it, or otherwise, prayers, mantras, meditations, they all work. Affirmations, they work if you have that faith. I mentioned it a little bit earlier on. Faith is key, as it is with any belief system. If you don't believe in it, it's not going to work, is it? Simple as that. So keep the faith. Keep the faith, guys. Keep doing what you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, keep developing. That's what we're here for. We're here to learn, grow and develop, and to experience what it's like to live in form as humans. And as I said earlier, we are our higher selves, a projection of our higher selves, and through us they are experiencing what we go through in a more physical way. Alright, guys, I think I've said enough. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't too deep for you, because I do realise that sometimes I do get a bit deep, you know, because it's a topic I'm quite passionate about. So these things, and I can get a bit deep, and so when I try to keep it light, it doesn't always work. But if I'm getting too deep, guys, let me know. I'll try and lighten things up, and I'll try and find other topics I can talk about which are a bit lighter in that way. But I enjoy discussing these things, I enjoy talking about these things. So let me know how you feel about them. Let me know in comments or whatever how you feel about these things. Until next time, guys, love you all. Namaste.